Hey, Lenny here. I've been talking about this for a while, and it's been festering on my mind ever since my last broadcast about it. Pretty much ever since I can remember, I've wanted to make a feature film, and while I never quite knew what that might be, I've been doing some thinking and imagining, and I think I finally tapped into something that really captures my interest as a storyteller. So, what I have here is a screenplay for a film that I want to make. Now, I wrote the script while going to school at Lawrence Tech, and while there, I took a class called Creative Entrepreneurship. And what that class did was it allowed us to develop an idea and essentially create a business plan, a business strategy for creating a business around that idea. And I was able to use my film idea, this screenplay, as the basis for that project. Now, what was nice about that class was I was able to create a business plan and a business model canvas and really look at my film as not just a piece of art or a piece of creative inspiration, but as an actual physical business that I could build upon. So I examined things like key customers and avenues that I might market to. A lot of aspiring filmmakers forget that it costs a lot of money to make a film. It's arguably one of the most expensive art forms there is, and why the filmmaking community is so small in comparison. The class culminated with Ship It Day, where all of us got together at the end of the semester and presented our projects to the students in the atrium of Lawrence Tech. So with mine, because I had a film, I had things like a movie poster, the script, some action figures to kind of show like the depth of some of the characters and the costumes and what this thing might look like, as well as a couple of mock-up teaser trailers that I put on my laptop so people could get an idea of the feel for this thing. I remember also posting the teaser trailers on Facebook and also doing a podcast talking about my progress in the film. Some of you might have even gotten a few random friend requests from a few of the characters from my film. In filmmaking, especially when you're an independent filmmaker, sometimes you have to be really creative when trying to find ways of marketing your film and talking about the film. Unfortunately, that method kind of backfired because it was really hard to find continuity between multiple characters and do all the Facebook pages myself, and I know some of you were less than thrilled that random strangers were contacting you on Facebook, so I do apologize for that. Anyway, once the class ended, I really wanted to pursue the film, but because of obligations to other classes and because I was working multiple jobs just to pay the bills, I kind of had to put the film on the back burner for a while. But the funny thing is, though, I carried the script around with me in my backpack so that every day I'd have it, and whenever I opened my backpack, there it was as kind of a reminder that it was something I really needed to work on down the road. Well, I finally graduated, so I have a little bit of spare time now in between working my other jobs and, of course, finding gainful employment doing media full time. But if you asked me what I really wanted to do with my degree, I'd be lying if I said anything else besides make a movie. Here's the biggest obstacle right now. It is a science fiction action film, and I'd like to shoot it on a modest budget here in Detroit. Now, in film school, one of the first things they teach us is not to shoot any kind of period piece or genre-specific film on the cheap. It's just really hard to do. If you look at a lot of aspiring filmmakers who are really successful, their first films are usually very simple, and they generally craft a story around stuff that they have around them. For example, Kevin Smith, with his film Clerks, well, he worked at a convenience store and shot in the store that he worked at. The same goes with Robert Rodriguez when he made his first film, El Mariachi. He actually had access to an entire town, like a ghost town, so he could shoot his whole film there. Shooting this big sci-fi epic as my first feature film might be a little ambitious for me, but during commencement, one of the speakers had a quote, and it was something like, "If we can ask why can't we ask why not?" That's not the direct quote, and I don't remember exactly who said it, but it's a great quote. I want to make my movie. This is something I want to do for myself. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to make my movie, and I'm going to try to update you with whenever I hit a certain milestone. Now, as Yoda said, do or do not, there is no try. But honestly, I'm saying try because right now this is kind of like a pet project for me. This is something I'm going to attempt to do because honestly, I have no idea how it's going to end up or how far I can go. I'm talking about a project that could easily go into the seven-figure range. Making a film is really overwhelming and very time-consuming, and it's even harder when you don't have a team backing you up. And that's right, I'm flying solo right now. I couldn't really find anybody to read my script, let alone anybody who really wanted to work on a big sci-fi epic. I guess it just doesn't sound feasible to a lot of people, and honestly, I don't blame them. So this is something that I'm just going to strive for and work on until it becomes a feasible venture. But I would like to talk a little bit about how the project came together, where the ideas came from, the process of writing the screenplay, and other things like where I'm going to be going next. After all, how is anybody going to know about my film unless I talk about it first? The name of the film is Galactic Redemption, and for those of you who went to middle school with me, that title might sound familiar. See, when I was a teenager, I really liked science fiction films, especially the Star Wars trilogy. I was a huge Star Wars geek, and I loved George Lucas. I wanted to be George Lucas. Even today, he's just such an aspiring filmmaker. I think he's the greatest filmmaker alive, not just for the movies he made, but for the things he did for for filmmaking in general. So I went off and wrote my own little science fiction trilogy as a series of short stories. The problem was because all I knew was Star Wars at the time. I was probably 16 when I wrote it. It ended up becoming a Star Wars knockoff. So I spent the next few years trying to fine tune it, polish it, make it my own thing, and revise and rewrite a lot of the characters and the story points. Over time, and over the course of writing like 12 different manuscripts about this big story, there really wasn't a consistent narrative to draw upon. But I had realized that through all these manuscripts, I had built up all of these plot points and characters and locations and planets, and I just needed to put them in a really strong storyline to keep it going. I pretty much realized that the last 15 or 20 years of writing these stories was really just me doing research on my film. So as you can see, these are all the different attempts at writing this big sci-fi thing. With the exception of a few of these, most of these stories read independently from each other. That is, they continue to start with a fresh take on the story. This one here is actually the first one I wrote back in 1995. Yes, I actually have the digital file from more than 20 years ago. These three are part of the first trilogy, and these three are from the second trilogy. Even with the chronology, I was trying to be George Lucas, writing multiple trilogies to tell a complete story. The rest of these are attempts at recrafting the story, and most of them are unfinished. So when I started writing the screenplay, I figured there's no way I can take 12 stories of just ideas, basically, and put it together and make it work. So what I was able to do was go through each story, file by file, and just make a list of every character and every location, in this case, planets. And from that, I could pull what I really liked about certain characters and certain planets, and just enough material to make one movie that was based upon all of this research and material I'd written. The final list looked something like this. Now, I had a few main protagonists, a central villain, and some planets that I could use. The next step was to write a biography about each of the characters. As you can see, the biographies are really brief, just a paragraph describing how each character fits into the story. During this time, I was trying to see how the characters connected to one another and what their relevance was to the main story. I also had to come up with the motivations of each character. For example, I've always had a hard time writing villains because it's hard to buy that a person's evil for no good reason. What makes a good villain? And why should people care about them? Once I had the list and the biographies for all the characters, the next step was to write a story treatment. You know, a lot of writers get so excited about the prospect of writing something creative that they jump right in and they don't really give it any thought. And I suppose you can write like this, but without a roadmap, eventually you'll get lost. This could probably work better for novels by writing like this because there's not really a rigid format, but with screenwriting there is. When you write a script, it times out at roughly 1 minute of screen time per page, so screenplays really need to be about 120 pages, which is a 2-hour movie. Obviously there are exceptions, but the general rule, especially if you're a beginning screenwriter, is that you should have your script timed between 90 and 120 pages, and the first 10 pages are really the most important, because if your audience doesn't understand what's going on in your movie within the first 10 minutes of the film, you might risk losing them. About every 30 pages in your screenplay, there should be a hook or a beat that changes the direction of the story. So about every 30 pages or so, your audience is going into the next act of your film. In other words, screenwriters have to follow a very rigid format, which is why writing a story treatment is essential. My story treatment was about 3.5 pages long, and there's no rigid formatting with this. All you're doing is basically writing out the plot and summary of your story. There can be dialogue, but basically it's in paragraph form, so you're basically just telling a story. The best analogy I have for this is when you use storyboards to lay out what your shots are going to look like. So the story treatment is basically my storyboard for my screenplay. The other reason why you write a treatment at this stage is to iron out any deficiencies or plot holes that might be in your storyline. Your script is always going to be changing like any piece of good writing, but it's better to iron these out now than when you get to your script and have to iron them out when you're fully engaged in your dialogue and your characters. Then you start writing. Now keep in mind, when I started this, I already had my list of planets, my characters, and their biographies, so I pretty much knew where it was all going to go. The story treatment, again, was like my roadmap, and it was beneficial in writing this thing. Now, for me personally, writing the script for this thing was invigorating. But a lot of filmmakers actually don't like the writing process, just as a lot of people in media, I guess, shy away from editing. The best part about the writing process is you don't have to worry about necessarily how things are going to work on screen. You're just telling your story, so basically anything goes, and the reality comes later. Now, I'll admit, I wrote the screenplay with the de facto that I was going to be directing and producing it myself, and not all screenwriters do that. So with me, I tried to keep it as practical as I could. For example, a lot of science fiction films, they use a lot of like hovering vehicles and of course spaceships. If you look at the original Star Wars, for example, George Lucas created a land speeder for Luke Skywalker to float around in. Science fiction is one of the hardest genres, I guess any period film is, because you have to create everything from scratch, and that's where a lot of your costs can build. So when I wrote my screenplay, I figured to keep costs down, I would just have everybody drive around in old vehicles that you'd see on Earth. Of course, there's a fine balancing act between fiction and nonfiction, and, I had to have some semblance of science fiction in there. Otherwise, why am I working in science fiction to begin with? I also wrote locations that I knew already existed in Michigan. For example, I live in Michigan, so writing an ice planet shouldn't be that much of a challenge to shoot, unless we have one of those off winters like this past winter where there was no snow. Every location I conjured up was something that basically existed in some form, where there might be some heavy set dressing involved, but you don't actually have to go in and build it from scratch. And that's going to help keep costs down in the long run. When I was writing this thing again, because I'm planning on directing it, cost was on the back of my mind the whole time. But that was alright too, because it helped me to be more creative. Sometimes the more limited we are, the more options we have available because we have to problem solve. And for me, it was fun to try to turn nothing into something. So a couple of months went by, and I finally had a finished first draft. From there, I called a couple of scenes to do a couple of mock teaser trailers for my college project, so that I had something to show people. When I shot these trailers, there was no budget, so I basically put a shout out on Facebook looking for local actors, and then I used my house and basically the parking lot of the place I work at to shoot these trailers. Realistically, these trailers did their job for my college course, and I was able to show, the students what I was working on, but they were really rough, and again, there was no budget, so these are not trailers that I would really show investors in the real world. When you go out looking to finance a project like this, you want to give investors a reason to invest in your film, and trailers are the way to do that. So down the road, when I start thinking about my financing options, I'm going to have to finance some money together so I can create some real trailers and really get people interested in this thing. Now, the script is the basic blueprint for your movie. From the script, you figure everything out. It's things like budget, wardrobe, casting decisions, location scouting. All these things are called from the script. In film school, I took an entire class on how to break down a script. Remember when I told you how much work I did just preparing to write the screenplay? Well, think about the kind of preparation that goes into actually making your film. In film school, and this goes in a lot of productions I've heard, we have this thing called the 6 P's of production, which is piss poor planning prevents proper production. And nothing could be more true. You have to plan everything. So the first thing I did for breaking down my script was I broke down the script into eighths. Theoretically, each page of a script can be broken down into eighths, and this will help you later when you shoot your film to see how big of a scene is and how much time you have to shoot each scene over so many days. For example, a scene might be 2 5/8 pages long, and obviously that's a much more complex scene than a scene that's an eighth of a page. Once this is done, I can generate what's called a continuity synopsis, or one line. What this is a detailed report of all the scenes that we need to shoot in chronological order. During principal photography, we can use this report as a reference for when we shoot scenes out of sequence. As you can see, the leftmost column lists the scene number, followed by the location the scene takes place in, what's happening in the scene, whether the scene takes place during the day or at night, how many pages the scene is, and the characters involved in each scene. This gives a pretty good overall breakdown of each scene and how it plays out with the rest of the movie. Then there's the cast and scene number breakdown. All this is a list of which characters are involved in which scenes. You start with the key characters first, and then work your way down to secondary characters and extras. It's obvious just by looking at the scene numbers which characters have the most screen time. This is useful when making the call sheets down the road, as I'll already know which cast members need to be available on any given day of shooting. This brings me to the location scene number breakdown. Essentially just another list, this tells me exactly how many times a specific type of scenery is used. This goes for both interior and exterior scenes. For example, if a scene takes place in a bar, I would have a different row for the interior of that bar as well as for the exterior shots for the same bar. This is mainly to help with when we shoot out of sequence. Ideally, you want to shoot in sequence whenever possible. However, you don't want to keep having to return to the same location multiple times, so having this list is helpful so we know when to wrap on our locations. For example, if you look at the top row, I'd want to shoot everything for scenes 1, 3, 7, 9, and 11 at the same time before moving on to another location. The last thing I've been working on is the shooting schedule, which is a really grueling process. Basically, it's taking all of the former reports and relisting them in the order I'm thinking of actually shooting the film. It's also a shot-by-shot breakdown of each scene. This is time-consuming, but absolutely necessary when scheduling the shoot. So the basic premise of this video was just to give you an idea of what I've been working on and how I'm planning on making this film happen. The next step for me is going to be finishing the shooting schedule, and then from there, hopefully going into storyboarding the entire film. And I might do some rough animatics using Photoshop and After Effects to give me a sense of the timing of the film. And then from there, it's really just kind of finding out how much money this is going to cost to make, and if it's even feasible to do something this big, or if I need to go back to the drawing board and write something that's a little more manageable for my first film. Either way, I'm going to keep you posted. I don't know when the next video is going to be, but as soon as I make a major stride, you'll know. And that's it. That's what I'm working on. So wish me lots of luck, and I'll try to see you on the other side. Peace out.